We've got a farm economy that's challenging. It's reminiscent of some parts of the early 1980s. How are we going to build out of it?
Oh, that's a great question. There are a lot of similarities. I'm not going to lie. There's a lot of similarities. There are some things that have changed during the time to where maybe we don't see, um, you know, farmland values collapse. Right. I think that's one of the areas where certainly back then that wasn't expected, and maybe I'm facing a little danger saying that right now. But I do think we will see some opportunities for producers to strategically align with initiatives and with business models that could help bring some profitability. The other thing that I think we're going to see is I think we're going to start to see increased diversification. We've kind of been in this era of specialization for a couple of decades now, and I think through value-added products and learning how to do a couple of things different, I think we'll see some diversification. But I would argue it's going to look different than the traditional diversification. It's going to be people like one of the first speakers we saw today doing things with media and finding outfitters for a brand line to sell product. I think we are going to continue to see that diversification at the farm level that'll support some of the agriculture sector. But broadly, I think some of the trends that we've seen over the century plus that the U.S. agriculture has kind of been in this modern era of increased consolidation, I think is going to continue, and producers will continue to find efficiencies when they're in their operations to continue to produce.
We've looked at a lot of folks who are looking at really remaining with the corn and soybean rotation. Some weren't in parts of southern Illinois. They're really getting more into double crop soybeans and wheat, and so there's some opportunity there. But when we look at corn and soybeans and trying to feed the processors that might be nearby, really not a whole lot other than just taking their price. That diversification may be far and few between.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is the strategic alliance I was kind of talking about. Of course, it brings on third-party risk, right? You have risk when you go into business with an entity or another individual, but certainly I think that's something in play. But I also, again, I think diversification looks a little different. In terms of the historical example was crops and livestock, and I don't know if necessarily we're going to see us go back to crops and livestock together, because we're seeing a very strong concentration, I think, at the beginning of the livestock sector. It's happened in dairy, it's happened in poultry. I think in some ways we're at the very beginning of the beef cattle sector and the consolidation there. But so I don't know if it'll be crop and livestock, but I certainly think service sector, ag service sector businesses being a part of a farm operation, and also farmer like mini cooperatives being formed. This is something that happened back when, but I think partnerships and sharing assets and equipment, sharing business services, whether that's some individuals doing crop scouting, some doing crop marketing, stuff like that. I think that's going to happen too, and of course then that provides an incentive to do crop services for those businesses as well.
I think a lot of younger folks would be quite intent on doing something like that. Some of the older farmers may say, well, maybe I better turn this over to somebody who's a little bit younger to be able to do it. So we could see quite a sea change. If you're right, we could see quite a sea change in age in agriculture.
Yeah, I think so. One of the challenges that we have when it comes to I think just the demographics of production ag is the system, or at least the industry as a whole, has tried to find ways to increase participation of young and beginning farmers. Right, that's kind of, you go anywhere and everybody wants to talk about how do we support young and beginning farmers. However, I think one of the other sides of this coin is we're still seeing the older generation remain actively involved, right? They sit there and it's an identity makeup. They're like, if I stop farming, what do I do? I don't have anything to do, and so they remain engaged in the operation. And where we've seen probably some of the most underappreciated advancements in technology is some of the ways that we've helped older people stay on the farm, right? And this has come in multi ways, but it's really, you think of some of the advancements of not having to do the big physical labor anymore. Well, that's allowed older generations to remain actively engaged as well. So those are some subtle changes that I think help especially the older generation, but it creates this ledge, if you will, or this cliff to where it could be a pretty strong decline if we were to see them want to step out of agriculture kind of in mass form, and a lot of young producers coming in. So
Great crystal ball you have for the distance. What's your crystal ball for the near term and all of the chaos that we see in agriculture coming out of Washington right now?
yeah, that's the hardest question I think of everything. It's it's in some ways my message has been, find the signal in all the messiness, right? Find the trends, use data to your advantage, and don't get emotionally driven. So many times I've ran into people and they want to talk about the latest headline. Well, let's step back, or I always encourage them to step back and think, what does that headline actually mean for your business, right? Is it something you can manage today, or is it something you just need to be thinking about and preparing for, right? And when we change our mindset of stress due to uncertainty right now to things that we can manage and building around a trend based on data and logic, I think we can manage that. I really, really do. But we're going to see probably, the word volatility gets used a lot. I think we're going to see a lot of volatility here in the next year. I really do, and it could cut both ways. It could be positive volatility, it could be negative volatility, but I do think we're going to see quite a bit of noise or messiness around those trend lines.
And you say in the next year, and you also indicated that it may be a year away before we get a farm bill.
I think it's possible. It's going to be difficult, I think, passing major legislation early in 2025. Congress is going to spend a lot of time talking about tax and spending, taxes being the primary one there. That's going to take a lot of time in the congressional calendar. So you spend some time doing that, and then you got to come back and you got to pass budget bills in the fall, and I think that's going to be a messy process too. So, it's hard to find just the calendar days to work on something like the Farm Bill. That's outside the fact that a good chunk of the parties can't even agree on what that Farm Bill should look like, and it's not one side versus the other side, but it's a whole bunch of different coalitions they're trying to figure this out. So I do think it's going to be a harder road than people think, given that there's a unified Congress and president, right? All controlled by the same party, thinking that it'll be a little bit easy. I don't think it's going to be that easy with that thin of a margin in the House side and all the disagreements or inconsistent messaging that we're seeing coming out of DC from just a policy standpoint.